Hello and welcome to Series 2, Episode 2 of the Like, Click and Share podcast. My name's Darren Winter, your host, and with me is Gemma Walton.
Did you forget my name there, Darren?
I did. Do you know what? I've been like, who are you? It's like, I just know you as Gemma. Just like, oh, Gemma Walton. So,
I'll let you off. We've only known each other about 7 years, but I'll let that one go.
Do you know what it is? We've not done a podcast for a little while, and we had a few technical problems getting into using this today. So we've had a bit of a break, unintended hiatus over kind of the summer period, and we're picking this up now, like in December. And it's been a busy few months.
One of us is in Spain, and one of us is in the UK, where it's minus 3 degrees.
And I have to say, I've been sent, kind of southern Spain, just south of Jaén, about 2 hours north of Malaga. And it's about 15 degrees today, cloudy, lots of forecasts of rain and heavy winds, but nothing compared back to the UK, which is gridlocked, frozen, snowed over, and lots of blazes. Everybody's going on strike. It's not a great time at the
freezing.
moment.
It's not a great time to be in the UK at the minute.
Definitely not. And I'm not gloating too much because I'm going to go back next week. So
there might be somebody waiting for you at the airport.
So in this podcast today, we're going to talk about Black Friday. And Black Friday was a few weeks back from the time that we're recording this podcast. But I thought it'd be interesting to kind of just review our impressions of Black Friday for 2022, how it compared to 2021. And the reason I did this, it was just interesting this year. So we might as well just jump straight into this. I felt that there was some big differences. And the first difference, I don't know if you noticed this, Gemma, that Black Friday seemed to start so much earlier. So it started about September. I'm into the electronic music scene, and there was a few technology companies, software and hardware, that is, and they were already kind of promoting, trying to steal ahead, I suppose, in September, and talking about Black Friday. And I think the word Black Friday as a term started to be used at that time, but also just the word, just even the black or even the colours started to use a lot earlier. So like kind of Halloween time. So maybe the Halloween theme was something kind of connected with it. So I think just it started a lot earlier this year. And then also the bigger things, I noticed that the discounting, even from some of the like big brands, so I looked at kind of like sporting brands, like in the UK, Europe, we've got Gymshark. And I noticed that they did some extra discounts, but also some of the size of the discounts were a lot larger, and the additional discounting, which I don't seem to remember. I mean, not just them exclusively, but just talking about just general additional discounting, so secondary discounting on top of quite large discounting, done quite so much this year. So I noticed that, and maybe the reason for that was just about, people finally got so much money this year, so trying to get everybody to spend their money with them so they don't sort of spend it elsewhere, but also just trying to get as much sort of cash in or get rid of the stock as quickly as possible. So I don't know if it was a case of sales weren't as high as they expected, or they kind of overproduced on stock, or just a case of just trying to get as many sales as possible. Maybe a combination of those things. What do you reckon, Gemma? Have you seen it change this year?
I feel pretty much the same. I mean, I feel like brands, stores, everything, they've been discounting for a long time, maybe back as far as the summer. And you might see 1 week it's £30 off, a few weeks later it's £50 off, a few weeks after that it's 15% discount, use this code. I think that's been going on now for a number of months, and I think probably to do, obviously, with the current climate here in the UK, and trying to give people a chance to get their presents in early, because obviously there are other things that people have to pay for. I've noticed there's been a lot more emails coming in than usual, especially if you're looking at things online like retargeting emails. They seem to be a lot more aggressive. I think some of the subject lines in the emails are a lot more aggressive than they might have been like last year or the year before. I do think there's been a real difference, but I feel like it's almost been, there's been a discount applied pretty much to everything for a long time, if that makes sense. Do you know what I mean? I feel like there's almost not even really been a distinction between like Black Friday and an ordinary day. I feel like it's almost, Black Friday has almost become like 3 months, if that makes sense. You know, I feel like there's been a lot of stuff going on because I think a lot of people haven't got the disposable income. I think as well you've also got we've got the strikes and everything, parcels being delivered, things like that have played into effect. But I don't know, I just feel like this year in particular, I mean, I think we've been saying this for a number of years, well, certainly for the last 3 years, that this year has just been totally different to any other year. And I feel like we've said that each year for the last 3 years with everything that's like gone on for the world. But I don't know, it's been a strange one, because I think anyway the last maybe 4 or 5 years, even going up to Christmas, all businesses have started their Boxing Day sales, for want of a better word, that would have usually been on Boxing Day. They've started them before Christmas. Do you know what I mean? A couple of weeks before Christmas, because people have known either that they're coming or they've hung on till the last minute till they've had money to pay for stuff. So I don't know. It's a bit of a strange one. It's almost like these things that were literally just one day years ago are now a number of weeks. You know, I don't know. I just think it's been a bit different this year, even in comparison to last year. I just feel like it hasn't been going on for a year. I don't mean that, but it's been going on for a lot longer than usual. Every time I open an email, there seems to be, you can use this discount code, or this was £28, you can have it for 50. You know, and I feel like that's been going on since, I don't know, the summer.
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, the backdrop is, and not just exclusive to the UK, but probably most of Western Europe and certainly the US, and we've got high inflation, or higher inflation, but certainly in the UK we're in double digits now, like 11-12%. So we've got higher inflation, we've got higher interest rates, so which means then that eats into people's disposable income. So they've got less money to spend. So then if people are spending, they've only got a little bit of money to spend. And they're either going to be spending it from what disposable income they got, or it's going to be going on credit. But the cost of living is obviously so much higher as well as a result of inflation. So we've got higher fuel prices, higher energy prices, and all this matters. That if you're running a business, if you're working in marketing or advertising, we've got to work so much harder and smarter. And what we know, certainly from the last few years, that when it comes to, if you're a freelancer, contractor, or working in a marketing department, the first thing to go is usually the marketing budgets. The marketing budgets normally get slashed. And the theory is that actually marketing should be increasing to make your business and that kind of stand out. But unless your business is fairly rich in kind of like cash, or they've got like decent amount of money for investment and they can ride the storm easily, then it's usually cuts to staffing. And we're already starting to see that. A couple of colleagues were saying, and I've not seen the specific examples myself, but I just got the message that companies like BuzzFeed, SEMrush, kind of laying off their content marketing departments, possibly sort of junior management now sort of being looked at as maybe being reduced as well. So kind of marketing is under a lot of threats at the moment. So in terms of advancing technology, kind of not taking our jobs, but just being smarter and being able to, maybe take up the slack and being able to do some things a little bit more quicker. So things like these AI writing tools that we've talked about on the podcast before. Even things like Canva now is so much more powerful, certainly the features that they've been launching this year. So, you don't need, or some companies don't need perhaps like, really high or big content marketing teams to do all this wizardry. Maybe Adobe qualified people, because you can do some of this content quite quickly, easily, cheaply in some of these tools. And potentially you can probably find, or companies can find, really well qualified people to use them ad hoc. So outsourcing much more kind of easily and still getting like much better results. So there's a lot of that activity like happening at the moment, and the new technology with software getting a lot better as well. But also just this trend that we've also seen before, just downsizing, even if the business doesn't particularly need to downsize. There's just the kind of I suppose some people might say the sensible option at the top from like executive teams to look after the business. It's uncertain times ahead for next year because of all these different economic pressures, that you need to look after the business for it to kind of sustain this period of turbulence. So it's, we're in December 2022 now, looking ahead to, to 2023. What's next year going to look like? None of us really kind of like know. So this is kind of the field. Well, this is the feeling that we're in right now. So yeah, Black Friday, involved with all of this is interesting. And I completely agree with you that it's definitely this period of discounting is been going on for quite a long time. And that could possibly also have some effects for brands as well in terms of their discounting, about how it affects them. I feel that, even as a consumer myself, that, sometimes you see discount and think, oh, I'll jump on that straight away. But now it's like, well, actually, do I need to get it now? Or probably the likelihood of them discounting it, Christmas or the New Year or maybe next year is probably quite high. The chances that it's probably going to come back on sale again. So why do I need to buy it now? I might even get a better discount if I wait. So that's the problem I see with that. What do you think? Is it the same for you?
Yeah, I think so. I also think this period of discounting will probably go on for longer than it would usually. Do you know what I mean? I think potentially we could see, and I might be wrong with this, but potentially I think we could see discounts just going on and on and on, rather than them just being Black Friday or Cyber Monday or Boxing Day sales or whatever else. I think it potentially could go on for longer, because people will need to sell the goods, because it's no good you having a warehouse full of stock that you can't sell. So they either have to sell it at a discounted price to get people to buy it, or they lose out on what they've got, and some things will have sell-by dates on them. It's interesting though, because I think sometimes when you go to the supermarket, you go and things are more expensive than what they were, and yet other things they have a discount. Do you know what I mean? So some of like the larger items have got discounts on them, whereas small everyday items that you need, they've totally gone up in price. I don't know. I'm finding it quite strange. It's almost like you've never seen like anything. We've never seen anything like this before. But I do think that these discounts will go on for as long as they need to, because people nobody, even the big brands, won't be able to afford to have loads of stock just sitting there in a warehouse, So I think it's better to sell 100% of something at 70% of the cost rather than sell hardly anything but at 100%. Do you know what I mean? It's hard to get the balance. I think it's hard for a brand to get the balance right.
Well, it's interesting. With all of that being said, I read an article a couple of weeks ago, and I will find it and put it in the link. I should have got it ready before the podcast today, but I read an article. I think it was either on qz.com, so Quartz, or it was in Monocle. It was an interesting article about the luxury sector, and they're weathering the storm really, really well. And I think they gave the example of Chanel and LVMH, so the Louis Vuitton group, that where they're kind of outperforming. So it's interesting in true marketing theory style that when times get tough, interestingly, the luxury sector always tends to do pretty good, which I find it's really interesting. So, I mean, things like the value of gold, because they are kind of trusted sort of beacons of worth. So, you know, people invest, if you've got a lot of money, I'm talking like not for the likes of me and you, but just generally, like, you know, if you've got money to invest, and people do invest in gold, but also they do to spend on the luxury sector. So the luxury sector seems to be doing like very, very well, just broadly speaking. But in terms of like the mainstream and kind of lower end brands, then they're definitely sort of, it's definitely really a real struggle. And I've just talked, I think a few people starting to understand this, but even visiting like local or big grocery retailers, just to keep an eye on kind of like profits and things about energy, like here in the UK, I should say, then even like the big commercial giants are starting to turn the heating off in the stores,
Right.
which is affecting like the customer experience. So when you get into if you go and imagine, you know, if it's like -5 outside, and then going into the store, going around the fridge and freezer sections, it's absolutely perishingly cold. So weather times before, when it's bad weather or coming into Christmas, people always used to see like, oh, let's go inside, keep warm, or maybe spend some money.
Yeah.
But now it's like, well, actually, if you know, like, you're going to keep going to the shops and the heating's not even turned on, it's like, well, you're kind of running around those shops just to get out of the shop as quickly as you can. So whether that might affect, I don't know, but kind of interestingly to see the results in January, February next year about how sales might be affected and people's customer experiences of how, you know, shopping might have changed, and whether people might want to go back to shopping more online. I'd say here in sort of like Spain, when I've been looking around some of the cities, again, they don't tend to do heavy discounting like in the stores. I'm not saying they don't do discounting, they do, but it's not like it is in the UK where it's so sensitive on price. And I would guess the same in the US as well. They kind of very, very, the public expectation, there's always kind of discounts and sales to lure people in. So here, like in Spain, it's not like that. It's much more, I don't know, traditional. It's quite nice actually in some respects that you go past and you, I suppose, more traditional. You look at the windows and you look at the value of the product itself, and there are kind of smaller discounts like around, but that's not the overarching message in the windows. Whereas back in the UK, it kind of is. It's like you only go into the shop if it's got like 50% off, 60% off, 70% off, or, you know, really emblazoned, like kind of there's some activity like happening inside just in this desperation to get people to buy. But it's not a good, in my, I think there has to be a value, because otherwise, if you keep discounting, like, people just don't believe in the value anymore. And certainly the sector, I can kind of talk at that, you know, we sort of create professional courses, certifications to have people upskill. And I know some of our competitors, there's hardly any value of what they're selling at sometimes the courses at. And it's like, well, how are you making any money? Because we know how much like the actual costs are, and then the price that they're kind of selling at, it's like it's not good business sense. It's not good business sense for them, and it's not good business sense for the whole like community or the sector to keep on heavily discounting like that, because in the end, like, the whole sector just goes bang, and people just expect this ongoing heavy discounting, and you can only kind of serve to not meet their expectations. In the end, it's like you're just turning over money and not making any profit. And it just it might sound like sour grapes. It really isn't. It's just, I'm just astonished at how people can carry on doing that without making like a lot of money and not having any business sense about actually kind of what that means for the business, because you can't grow your business properly that way. So you either have to look for new sectors to diversify in, maybe even kind of come out of the sector altogether. It's not great. So it's a bit worrying, I think, like for some companies, in the grocery sector and fashion, it's like the margins are really, really, really tight, but at least you can sell on volume. So you have got that. But if people are still kind of holding back, then you've only got to get on the wrong side that can make it's a massive risk, kind of like people are taking. We're starting to see a lot, again, maybe in the US and mainland Europe, it might be different, but in the UK, we start to see a lot of brands that may be going out of business are being snapped up by kind of like big multiples. So like Next, it's a big fashion retailer here, sort of picking up Jules lately, which was the big kind of, again, a traditional like fashion sort of chain, been going for quite a few years, but kind of maybe according to some reports, it kind of like lost its way, lost its identity. And I think that's ever more clear that you need to have a unique selling point about your business. If you're like listening to the podcast and think, well, where does it all end up? It's just about being relevant, always being relevant to, and you have to I think, make a judgment about your business, about like, well, what we're offering, is that unique enough now? Is that why should people come and shop with us? Why people should spend their money? And you have to go and check it out. And if the answer is no, you've got to start making some changes. Didn't need to be drastic changes, but you do need to start being a bit more edgy, perhaps taking a few more risks. Maybe start investing in new product development. Next week, we're going to be talking about kind of the state of social media, because in the past it's all been about, well, let's get out onto new platforms, let's try to grow the audience. But even that's now so much harder because there's lots of changes happening like this year. So we'll talk more about that. Have you got any other thoughts that you'd like to add about that, Jen?
I think it's the only other thing I would say is I think it's really difficult for brands and businesses to get this discounting right, because sometimes it's done in a way that works, and then other times people are thinking, well, hang on a minute, if you can sell it at this price now, why couldn't you sell it at this price 6 months ago when I bought it? A bit like the TV contracts or internet contracts, you get them at a discounted rate for the first 18 months, but if you don't renew before that contract is up, the price sometimes doubles or trebles, and it's like the service hasn't changed. You're still using the same internet line, you're still using the same TV dish or whichever one you're using. So if you can do it at that price for that amount of time, why all of a sudden does the price then increase? And I think that's the thing sometimes people struggle with. They don't get it, and sometimes I think it's either it's not pitched well by brands, or people are just really, really suspicious, because if nothing's changing and the TV signal and internet signal still coming in at the same price, why does the price then go from X to 3 times X? And I think because prices are being discounted a lot more currently and have been for a while, obviously because of the current climate, there's that expectation, I think, from people that they'll expect that those reduced prices will continue. Do you know what I mean? Because it's like, if I can get that jacket for X now, if I wait 6 months and I want it in a different colour or slightly different style, why is it then twice the price or an extra 30% on the price? Do you know what I mean? I think it must be really, really difficult for brands at the minute, and something really hard to get right, because you're not changing anything like quality wise in the garment. You're not changing, do you know what I mean? You're not changing anything particularly major unless it's a brand new product that you're coming out with. And so I can imagine that it must be difficult for people.
Yeah, you definitely have to be constantly monitoring your data every single day. It's something I'm kind of like writing about at the moment, kind of developing a new course about big data. And in that kind of talking about how, a lot of some really recent examples of like businesses that they're not monitoring the data consistently. So if you work in a very large marketing department, looking not just at your website visits, but looking at what people are looking at, on the web pages, and looking at the conversion rates, and trying to understand some patterns about kind of what people are looking at and maybe not buying, and trying to get some feedback. There's a lot more surveys coming out, I've noticed, of trying to understand, like, what people kind of think about the brands and what people might be looking at, and just general sentiment, I suppose, just towards products and kind of how they feel. And if you're very clever enough and you've been doing sort of monitoring of feedback, kind of customer sentiment over the years, you should be able to go back then and see how those attitudes have been changing, and make kind of appropriate level responses. Like you say, that I think there's a lot more media reports now about kind of, I suppose, greed and corporate greed. Like in you saying, there has to be justification for kind of some prices, like in terms of the changes. And we're seeing that in some of the email kind of content coming through from much larger businesses about kind of the approach towards Christmas. Definitely it's a lot more low key in the UK, certainly. And then in terms of what the imagery is being shown, it's not so much gluttony that it has been on previous years, like everybody sitting around the table with like big feasts of food and stuff like that, because, parts of the UK, they don't have, you may not have the jobs, or just don't have the disposable income, or not being able to afford heat. So the relevance of that brand, keep just displaying imagery like that, is not it's not acceptable. And we've seen a few giants having to change their approach halfway through their campaigns as well.
Yeah.
So we're going a little bit off kind of the topic of Black Friday, but hopefully just kind of give you a flavour of kind of some of the things that are going on and kind of what might be going in people's minds at the moment. And I think having this approach going into January of just being a bit hesitant, a bit more cautious, maybe having a few more A/B testing approaches to kind of what works for people, what doesn't work, is probably a good approach if you don't know where to start. But otherwise, if you are in tune with your customers, kind of just going with the flow. But definitely community spaces, which we'll talk about next week, is one way, because you can easily see what kind of the phrases, what people are using, how they're talking. I think is really, really helpful. So we'll talk more about that on the podcast next week. So I hope you found this podcast interesting. If you have any comments, if things that we might have missed or kind of glossed over, then do get in touch. The email address will be in the show notes below. But thank you very much for tuning in, and look forward to, hopefully you'll look forward to hearing from us soon. And we enjoy doing this podcast, and hopefully enjoy it as well. And we'll catch up with another podcast in the future. Bye for now.
Bye.